Friday morning, U.S. Airlines Flight 3590. Halfway through the flight, it was as if Satan himself had suddenly come on board. Or at the very least, that horned harbinger of horror was holding a demonic dance party on the plane's wings. Our first warning that trouble was brewing came when the fasten your seatbelts light flashed on. Moments later, a tense-voiced stewardess, you know there's trouble when there's a tense-voiced stewardess, when she announced, due to stronger than usual turbulence, all beverage service will be immediately suspended. The cabin will be prepared for landing. Being that we were still about an hour away from the airport, I did not take this a good sign that we were preparing for landing. All at once, the plane seemed caught in this cosmic tug of war between metal machinery and Mother Nature. It began with a sudden dip that made your stomach flip-flop and your just-eaten bag of peanuts rush back up towards your throat. Everybody on board shared a collective gasp, 200 fists clenched simultaneously, and then the bouncing began. Life is often like that, isn't it? We're flying along, seatbelt is unfastened, we're reading a good book, we're snacking on some peanuts, we feel like we're heading toward our destination, no problem whatsoever. And suddenly, without warning, the bouncing begins. Something, be it our body, mind, spirit, or some situation, is suddenly out of our control. Life as we know it is at risk. We fasten our seatbelts, we hold on, but we wonder what will hold us as things go all shaky. We've all been there. Some of us are there now. All of us will be there sometime in the future. Back on flight 3590, the woman seated next to me suddenly asks, "Are you a doctor?" Hoping she isn't about to suffer from motion sickness, I pull away ever so slightly and answer her, "No, I'm not." She says, "You're reading medical journals, and I thought you were a doctor." "Actually, I'm a minister," I say. "I'm writing a sermon about prayer, and am reading the latest scientific research on whether prayer is at all effective." "Of course prayer is effective." She cuts me off before I could even finish my sentence. "Prayer helps," she snaps at me. "You pray to the Lord answers you. You don't need a scientific study to know that." She shoots me a look that says, "What kind of minister are you?" 54% of Americans report they pray on a daily basis, and 29% report they pray more than once. 87% of Americans believe that God answers their prayers at least some of the time. Now, the notion that God is an external being that we entreat is the very thing Mark Twain attacks in his book, Letters from the Earth. The idea that humanity beseeches a higher power, believing that God will intervene in the day-to-day routine of earthly life, seems ludicrous to Mark Twain. For him, the idea that prayer actually does something is a fallacy. Twain writes, "Humanity prays to God and thinks God listens. They pray for health and favor and protection, and do it with hopefulness and confidence, although no prayer has ever been answered." Now, some of us take great offense at Twain's statement. For some of us, God or goddess or creator is something real, very real, something with whom we can connect to for strength and for guidance. For some of us, This power is real, and we have felt its power in our own lives. Now, some of us here agree with Twain. The idea of God or a higher power as cosmic prayer listener is pure superstition. It is, as Joseph Campbell writes, a pathological mythology. Others of us see higher power not as an external being to whom we pray, but as a kind of internal wisdom that we can awaken and access to inform and animate our lives. For others of us, higher power is more like an energy flow within and between all things. Still, others of us aren't sure, and I guess probably at least one or two of you don't really care. Dr. Larry Dawsey has extensively studied the power of prayer, specifically intercessory prayer. In intercessory prayer, someone at a distance prays for the well-being of someone else. Guiding Larry Dawsey's scientific study of prayer was one question: can we mentally influence, voluntarily and purposefully, at a distance, the psychological and or physiological status of another living being? In simple terms, can one person's thoughts influence another biological system at a distance? Science calls this focused intentionality. Exploring prayer as our mind's focused intention eliminates for a moment the debate of God or no God. It focuses on the human intention behind prayer. It focuses on the human ability to direct our mind and impact the world. It looks at the result of prayer rather than being tied down in the mechanics of prayer. Compiling scientific research from around the world, Dr. Dawsey sought to discover whether any effects of focused intentionality truly existed. He first asked, could our mind, our prayer as it were, affect the most basic forms of life? Studies were conducted on fungus cultures. One study asked people to use thought or desire to increase the growth of yeast in test tubes. The study produced significant results, saying yes. In another study, people tried to inhibit the growth of fungus cultures through conscious intent. Of a total of 194 dishes, 151 showed slowed growth. Made it fast, then the mind made it slow. Other studies again and again suggested the mind's ability to impede or stimulate the growth of life within cultures of bacteria. Now, moving beyond those simple living organisms, Dawsey asked if such an effect could influence higher life forms. Again, study results were positive. Mice recovered more quickly from anesthesia when healers offered that mental intent. Other studies show that wounds healed faster on mice for whom healing was mentally directed. But it is with humans that the results of prayer hit most powerfully. In 1988, there was a study involving 393 persons admitted to the coronary care unit at San Francisco General Hospital. Unbeknownst to any of them, intercessory prayer was offered for half the patients. The study was designed according to rigid scientific criteria, and none of the patients knew they were being intentionally prayed for, thus eliminating any chance for the power of suggestion. The study found that the prayed-for patients were 5 times less likely than the unprayed-for group to require antibiotics, and they were 3 times less likely to develop pulmonary edema, a condition in which the lungs fill with fluid. They also had fewer pulmonary arrests, and none of the prayed-for group required a mechanical ventilator. Using hernia patients, the study was replicated in Israel. Again, the prayed-for patients showed significantly fewer complications and a much quicker recovery time than the group that was not prayed for. Dr. Dawsey says, if the technique being studied had been a new drug or surgical procedure instead of prayer, it would almost certainly have been heralded as some sort of breakthrough. Even some hard-boiled skeptics agreed on the significance of the findings. Dr. William Nolan, who's written a book debunking faith healing, acknowledged, "It sounds like this study will stand up to scrutiny. Maybe we doctors ought to be writing on our order sheets, 'Pray 3 times daily.'" The research continued. A study published 13 years ago in the Archives of Internal Medicine replicated these same results with 990 coronary care patients. Another study, published in the Western Journal of Medicine, conducted with 40 advanced AIDS patients, found that distant healing result in fewer doctor visits, hospitalizations, and AIDS-related illnesses. The implications of this science of prayer has potentially staggering implications for us. This is not just cold science. This pulses with the warmth of the human heart. Researcher Dr. Marilyn Schlitz says, "We assume that we are isolated beings. In fact, this data supports the idea that we are interconnected at a level that has yet to be fully recognized by Western science, and that it is very far from being integrated into our worldview. If our intentions can influence the physiology of a distant person, and that is very far from us, if our thoughts can be incorporated into mine, if your thoughts can be incorporated into mine, not just in clinical settings, but everywhere, it requires that we be more thoughtful and responsible with other people. The real challenge," Dr. Schlitz says, "faces us is how to learn more about the nature of the human condition and how we can create ourselves as fuller and more complete human beings." With this earlier research, it really seemed like something was happening in prayer. Something was connecting one mind to another. Something was connecting one life to another. Perhaps it was God. Perhaps it was energy flowing between us. Perhaps, as quantum physics suggests, consciousness may not reside in the individual brain, but rather beyond the body in an infinite field of possibility. Perhaps there are many individual brains, but one collective metamind. But then, a monkey wrench was thrown into all of this data. 7 years ago, in April of 2006, the American Heart Journal published the long-awaited results of a 10-year study of patients undergoing heart surgery conducted by Dr. Herbert Benson of Boston's Mind-Body Medical Institute. According to the New York Times, this study was the most scientifically rigorous investigation of whether prayer can heal illness. Dr. Suzanne Coven of the Massachusetts General Hospital summarized the surprising findings in the Boston Globe, saying, "The prayers did not seem to improve the patient's outcomes. Interestingly, if the patients were told they were being prayed for, they had more post-operative complications." This study, the newest, suggests prayer doesn't make a difference, and that knowing that you're being prayed for is actually harmful to your health. Ugh! This study raises more questions than it answers, and the leaders of the study plan to conduct more extensive scientific studies to gather more data, more information. I want to believe that our focused intention, the collective impact of our mind's concentration, our prayer, can influence things on a cellular level. That would be amazing. But depending on how you interpret the latest scientific data, the jury is still out on that issue. But there is one thing that I do know to be true about prayer. There's one thing that I do know about taking the time to connect within to our sense of caring for another person. Prayer, acknowledging our concern for someone else, may not change someone else's circumstances, but it does change us. It can change how we are, how we feel. It can refocus us on what matters. It can reconnect us to the deep compassion that lives within each one of us. It can help recall us to our best selves again. It can return us to the experience of love and loving. And we don't need any scientific studies to tell us that. In the novel Where the Rainbow Ends by author Jameson Currier, there's a scene that takes place in a hospital. A caretaker, warned from the ongoing illness of a friend, meets a Jamaican nurse. This is that interaction. On his 6th day in the hospital, just as things had begun to look better, Nathan started running another fever. He kept floating in and out of exhausted sleep. I felt certain that the infection was spreading. That evening, before leaving to go back home, I sat in the hospital lobby, not really ready to leave, my mind a heavy cloud of details, and I sat there trying to sort through things, waiting for someone to just tell me what to do. What is the meaning of life when life disappoints you? Where does faith come from when you're all out of strength? How could I accept the false romanticism of religion when faced with the harsh disappointments of facts? I stood up, and there was the Jamaican nurse. She carried a paper cup of coffee, and as she sat down beside me, I watched a thin stream of steam rise and disappear. I was really not ready for conversation with anyone, and I felt my eyes move away from her. "Do you pray?" she asked. "No," I answered, and I was not in the mood either to be preached to. "I don't know much about God," she said. "Who does, really? But praying keeps me low, you know?" "Low?" I asked. "Level, calm. If you don't pray to God," she said, "then pray to love. Think about love. Make God what you need for God to be for you. But pray that you keep the love." She stood and flattened out her skirt. "Pray," she said again before she left. "It's a good way to learn." May it be so. Blessed be. Amen.